Hola muchachos, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Aquí tienen el horario para hoy, miércoles el 27 de abril. No homework was due for today. Your learning targets are to continue talking about what you used to be like when you were younger, using the target vocabulary to talk about what toys you preferred, and the imperfect tense to talk about things you used to like to do and how you used to be like. Your warm-up for today is a review of the notes from last class on indirect object pronouns. Actually doing two things. You're identifying the indirect object pronoun that's used in each sentence. Indirect object pronouns are me, te, le, nos, and les. These are the notes that we went over last class. Me, to or for me. Te, to or for you. Le, being for him or her, or you polite. Nos, to or for us. And les, being to or for them, or you plural. So using those notes, identify which indirect object pronoun is being used, and then also identify the infinitive of the verb that's being used in the imperfect. So for example, mi abuelo me llevaba al parque para jugar con los patos. My grandfather used to take who to the park? Used to take me to the park. Indirect object pronouns usually going to be before the conjugated verb, although we talked about last class how it could be attached to the infinitive when you have two verbs together. So the verb to want, quería, so the verb to buy, comprar. When you have two verbs together, it could be attached. It being the indirect object pronoun could be attached to the infinitive, but usually it comes at the beginning, before the verb. So me is the indirect object pronoun in that example, and then this right here is the verb llevar. And I know it's an AR verb because the aba, regular AR ending. Mis padres nos leían libros en casa los sábados. Nos is our indirect object pronoun. Leer is the verb in the imperfect. My parents used to read who books? Used to read us books at home on Saturdays. So here you have your 4 warm-up questions. Go ahead and identify the indirect object pronoun and then the infinitive for each of those. We're going to review the key concepts for your test next class on Chapter 4A. And let's go ahead and take a look at those right now. And then you'll have an in-class review activity, which is homework for you to submit, and then just study the key concepts for your test next class. First key concept is the vocabulario en contexto. That's on page 186. A lot of these are cognates, words that look like, sound like, and have the same meaning. For example, el tren eléctrico, el triciclo, el dinosaurio, los bloques. These are things that we used to like to play with when we were little, that key vocabulary there. And then on page 187, you have activities, places that we used to like to go to. Be familiar with this key vocabulary. And you also have the glossary on page 208 that you can use. Kind of as your one-page review. Actually, you're going to be using this glossary to do some of the review for your homework. So that's the first key concept, is the key vocab. And then in terms of the grammar, you have 3 concepts. The first is the regular verbs in the imperfect. That's on page 194. So know those endings of AR verbs and of ER and IR verbs. Remember that the yo form and the el, ella, usted form share the same endings in the past, and that AR verbs have an accent, AR verbs have an accent over the nosotros form, the first A in the nosotros form ending. ER and IR verbs, same thing. Yo form and el, ella, usted form share the same endings. And for ER and IR verbs, accents above the I in all forms. And ER and IR verbs share the same endings as well. Talked about context clues for the imperfect, and then on page 111 for the preterite. But we're actually not going to get into that too much this chapter, or next chapter. as we'll be looking at how both the preterite and the imperfect are used together. So the ones highlighted in green back on page 194, those are great context clues to know when to use the imperfect. The ones in the purple box here we took a look at together back in quarter 3 and also again this chapter. These are clues for when to use the simple past, or what we call the preterite. So that is the those are the regular endings of imperfect verbs in the imperfect. Irregular verbs are going to be on page 196, and remember there are only 3. The verbs ir, ser, and ver. Ir, ser, and ver follow a similar pattern of regular verbs in that the yo form and the el, ella, usted form are the same, and that the nosotros form carries an accent above that first vowel. And lastly, indirect object pronouns are on page 199. Those are the ones that we went over last class and the ones that we reviewed for your warm-up. So those should be pretty fresh. And I reviewed those at the very beginning of this video. So let's go ahead and take a look at the core workbook pages 73, 78, and 81. This is going to get you guys ready for your test. Your test will be a mixture of multiple choice, a little bit of fill in the blank, and a little bit of short answer. And maybe a couple true false. So typical standard format. It's going to be out of 40 points. And let's go ahead and take a look at those 3 core workbook pages. So you can click here and it will take you to a PDF copy. You guys can do this on a separate sheet of paper, or you guys can download and submit or do electronically. It's up to you. So this is page 73. Core page 73. It says complete the following sentences logically using words from the bank. Not all of them will be used, however, since there are only 8 spaces and 10 words to choose from. All of these are on page 208 at the very end, the glossary, and that's what I had mentioned at the beginning of the video. You probably want to have that page handy. It'd be very helpful. Your kind of one-stop shop to review the key terms. So we have let's see, where did that go? There it is. Nope. There we go. Colección is a cognate, that's a collection. Oso is bear. Generosa is a cognate, generous. Tren is a cognate, train. Molestar is a false cognate, to bother or to annoy. Tímida is a cognate, timid or shy. Bloques is a cognate, blocks. Triciclo is a cognate, tricycle. Vicino is neighbor, and saltar is to jump. So let's do the first couple together. De niño me gustaba hacer casas y carreteras con mis. So this is a plural possessive adjective, so we know we need a plural noun. Plural noun, looks like we only have one option, and that would be bloques. Me gustaba hacer casas y carreteras. I used to like to make houses and freeways with my blocks, mis bloques. A los 3 años, Claudia ya sabía montar en blank. At 3 years old, Claudia already, ya means already or now. Before a verb, it means already. Already used to know how to ride. I'm looking for something. Montar en tren? Maybe montar en triciclo. Let's see if in the key vocabulary there we have the verb montar. Montar, not on page, but triciclo is tricycle. That kind of makes the most sense. So we're going to put triciclo there for number 2. So pick the vocabulary word that fits the context. And again, not all of them are going to be used. For part B, complete the analogies. An analogy is a comparison to show similarities. So salir, llegar, prohibir, blank. Salir is to leave, llegar is to arrive, so those are opposites, right? prohibir is to prohibit. And we're looking for the opposite. The opposite of to prohibit would be to allow. And that would be the verb permitir.
Permitir.
To allow. So you get the idea. Lavar is to wash. Limpiar is to clean. Compartir is to share. So we're looking for something that's more or less synonymous with sharing. Let's take a look. Ofrecer would be to offer. Looks like that would fit. But definitely a verb there for number 2. So complete the analogies. This is all vocab, page 73. Page 78, you're completing this sequence for Martin and Susana to talk about what life was like when they were children. You're using the verbs ir, ser, and ver as you are completing this. This is very similar to exercise 16 that we did together after we did the notes on irregular verbs in the imperfect. If you recall this exercise, remember ir is going to be used with locations. Locations and verbs, because it's talking about going to that place or going to do an activity. Ser is going to be used with adjectives because you're describing what someone or something was like. And then ver is going to be something that we watch. So we'll do the first couple together. Mi familia y yo vivíamos en el campo. My family and I used to live in the countryside. La casa blank muy grande. Grande is an adjective. Ser should be used here. And your subject is la casa. So in terms of what form to use, we're going to use the la form because you're talking about it, right? It being the house. So la casa era muy grande. Mis abuelos vivían con nosotros. My grandparents used to live with us. Ellos blank pelirrojos. Now pelirrojos isn't a word that we've come across. You look it up, you'll see it's an adjective. It means red hair or red-headed. Again, that's an adjective. So we're going to use the verb ser. In this case, in the ellos form, and that would be eran. Mis abuelos eran pelirrojos cuando nosotros blank jóvenes. Jóvenes is another adjective. It means to be young. So we're going to use ser, this time in the nosotros form, and that would be éramos. So that's the key for this one. Ir, locations, right? Or an expression of going to do something. Ser, an adjective, goes along with an adjective. And then ver is going to be something that we watch or that we see. All right, so complete that sequence. It's a long one, so one's going to take the most amount of time, but do so methodically and use page 196 there as your guide in the notes that we took. And the last section is going to be page 81, and really all this is getting you to look at the glossary that's on page 208 and to fill in all the key terms there, the key concepts that I outlined for you at the beginning of this video. So in this section right here at the very beginning, you're going to fill in with words for toys, right? So everything right here to talk about toys. Here, the descriptive adjectives you're going to use to talk about some personal qualities, words that we use to describe people's qualities. Pets, you can also find on page 208 there. Again, pick any terms that apply. For the grammar, you have the conjugations of jugar and permitir. Those can be found on page 194. Ser and ir can be found on page 196, the irregulars. And then to tell to whom or for whom an action is done, those are indirect object pronouns. And then you have the indirect object pronouns on page 199. So just a nice solid review. That's what we'll be doing for the majority of class. Make sure to submit that in preparation for next class. And I will see you again, muchachos. Hasta luego. Ciao.